The negative effects of urbanization is the working class had little or no bargaining power with their new employers. Workers were treated horribly, they worked in dangerous factories for nothing. Many were uneducated and men were spending small amount of money in their family made on alcohol and causing crimes. Streets had trash piled up, poor drinking water, ineffective sewage systems, terrible air quality, and animal droppings. Birth rates decreased as divorce rates increased. Women had to fight for their rights and promote their values in society. Poor children and their families relied upon child labor to improve their conditions. Child labor forced many children out of school and into work.
The positive effects of urbanization included many inventions that were created to benefit the people's needs, such as skyscrapers, which were introduced by how they're made by cheap steel, and the invention of elevators. Another invention that was created to benefit people's needs was the electric trolley, which allowed better transportation so people won't have to walk anymore. Throughout the Gilded Age, the creation of the transcontinental railroad was the most important among the other inventions because it served as a link of trade, commerce, and transportation between the east and the west of America, which allowed mass consumption and regional specialization. The first transcontinental railroad was completed in 1869 and opened up western mining and farming regions, also connecting isolated areas with larger markets and allowed for the growth of commercial farming and mining. With the creation of the railroad, people were given better employment opportunities, access to cultural advances with establishments of churches and libraries, and easy access to goods and services. Along with the creation of new inventions changing American society, there were new education laws and universities formed, as well as different types of amusement being introduced, such as public parks, vaudeville amusement, and sporting events.
As some urbanization philosophies involved Puritan work ethic, a concept in sociology, economics, and history attributed to Max Weber's work, is based on the notion that the Calvinist emphasis on the necessity for hard work as a component of a person's calling and a worldly success is a result of personal salvation. From the Puritan work ethic is the theory of social Darwinism, which refers to the notions of struggle for existence being used to justify social policies, which makes no distinction between those able to support themselves and those who are not, or survival of the fittest. Hotel Alger's books clearly talks about the poor having the best qualities and ideas that can have them be from poor to rich, rags to riches. His books supports the belief that in order to survive, you have to be great at something. As a similar theory, they say that you have to have certain qualities to become rich. The social gospel was a movement that was an effort among Protestant Christians to improve the economic, moral, and social conditions of the urban poor. The creator Walter Rauschenbach believed that the church replaced Jesus' calling it the kingdom of God, taught the Christian's duty is not a matter of getting individuals to heaven, but of transforming their life on earth into the harmony of heaven. Western leaders agreed with Rauschenbach that social problems were actually moral problems on a large scale, persuading citizens that many social issues could be cured through practical Christianity. They believed that if they met the needs of the poor, it would change them spiritually and morally, and help them improve their lives.
The YMCA, or the Young Men's Christian Association, was an organization started by George Williams and a few of his friends to provide a refuge of faith to the poor among London's slums. The organization became well known to the social gospel movement since they provided everything to the Christian community. The Salvation Army was not intended to be an organization, as William Booth, similar to how Williams thought, believed that Christians should take the message of the Bible out of the church and to the people where it's mostly needed. With that, he and his wife wanted to bring hope to the poor in London that traditional churches wouldn't accept, and did what he could to give spiritual or practical guidance. The Children's Aid Society was founded by Charles Loring Brace in 1853. He was determined to give children an alternative to life in the slums and the streets. His theories convicted that children aren't being taken care of properly. His work helped transform social services and social reforms in New York and across the nation, benefiting many children. Some of the reactions towards urbanization included the creation of the City Beautiful movement, an American urban planning movement led by architects, landscape architects, and reformers that flourished between the 1890s and 1920s. The idea of organized, comprehensive urban planning arose in the United States, which claimed that design could not be separated from social issues and should encourage civic pride and engagement.
Another reaction came from Frederick Law Olmsted, an American landscape architect, journalist, social critic, and public administrator. He is popularly considered to be the father of an American landscape architecture. After Olmsted came Louis Sullivan, an American architect and the father of skyscrapers and the father of modernism. He is considered by many as the creator of the modern skyscraper, as an influential architect, and as a critic of the Chicago School. He was also a mentor to Frank Lloyd Wright and an inspiration to the Chicago group of architects who have come to be known as the Prairie School.
Between the 17th and 18th centuries, most immigrants came to America mainly for religious freedom and economic opportunity, such as the Pilgrims, the Quakers, and the Scottish. Christopher Columbus was included as one of the most famous colonial explorers who sailed across the Atlantic Ocean in search for a route to India and to trade for species. As a result, he made 4 trips in total to the Caribbean and South America. All immigrant groups improved their average skills in America. Wages were higher in America than in Europe, and it was easier to own a farm, but Americans worked harder than Europeans, taking fewer holidays.
Many of the new immigrants were typically young, male, Catholic, or Jewish, and didn't know any English, with about 70% of immigrants in America came from Southern and Eastern Europe. The majority of new immigrants were unskilled laborers with little money and education.
The safety valve theory was a theory that explained how to deal with unemployment, which gave rise to the Homestead Act of 1892. In the U.S., this theory meant that if the East started filling up with immigrants, you could always go west until they reached a point where they could not move any farther. And this scared the citizens of the U.S.
The Immigration Restriction League was an anti-immigration organization founded by a group of Harvard graduates in 1894. They worried about immigrants bringing in poverty and organized crime at a time of high unemployment. Members of the organization believed that immigration contributed to social problems such as urban crowding, poverty, crime, and labor unrest.
Nativism is the intense opposition to an internal minority on the grounds of its allegedly un-American characteristics. Fear and hatred of aliens in the United States has been typically directed against religious or ethnic minorities and by political radicals.
As a U.S. political party that flourished in the 1850s, the Know Nothing Party was an outgrowth of the strong anti-immigrant and especially anti-Roman Catholic sentiment that started to manifest itself during the 1840s. Caught in a sectional strife disrupting all natural institutions, the Know Nothing Party fell apart after 1856. Anti-slavery Know-Nothings joined the Republican Party while Southern members flocked to the pro-slavery banner still held aloft by the Democratic Party. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, or the Yellow Peril, was the first major law that restricted immigration to the United States. It was enacted in response to economic fears, especially on the West Coast, where native-born Americans attributed unemployment and declining wages to Chinese workers whom they also viewed as racially inferior. The Chinese Exclusion Act, signed into law on May 6, 1882 by President Chester A. Arthur, effectively halted Chinese immigration for 10 years and prohibited Chinese from becoming U.S. citizens. Through the Geary Act of 1892, the law was extended for another 10 years before becoming permanent in 1902. It foreshadowed the Immigration Restriction Acts of the 1920s, culminating in the National Origins Act of 1929, which capped overall immigration to the United States at 150,000 per year and barred Asian immigration. The Immigration Act of 1924, or the Johnson-Reed Act, including the National Origins Act and the Asian Exclusion Act, enacted on May 26, 1924. It was a United States federal law that limited the annual number of immigrants who could be admitted from any country to 2% of the number of people from that country who were already living in the United States in 1890, which was down from the 3% cap set by the Immigration Restriction Act of 1921 according to the census of 1890. The law was primarily aimed at further restricting immigration of Southern Europeans and Eastern Europeans. The melting pot theory was a metaphor for a heterogeneous society becoming more homogeneous, the different elements melting together into a harmonious whole with a common culture. It is particularly used to describe the assimilation of immigrants to the United States. The melting together metaphor was in use by the 1780s. The exact term melting pot came into general usage in the United States after it was used as a metaphor describing a fusion of nationalities, cultures, and necessities in the 1908 play of the same name. Assimilation was the act of bringing into conformity with the customs, attitudes, etc. of a group, nation, or the like, adapt or adjust, to assimilate the new immigrants. Assimilation theories that were prevailing at different times are barometers of the political and socio-economic environments experienced by immigrants. They have profound influence on social policies designed for the incorporation of immigrants and public attitudes that directly affect the perception and reception of immigrants. Different assimilation theories therefore could trigger the emergence of varied coping and adaptive strategies among immigrants as a response. The Hull House, the most prominent American settlement house, was established in Chicago in 1889 by Jane Addams, which was located in a poor immigrant neighborhood of Greeks, Italians, Russians, and Germans. It offered instruction in English, counseling to help newcomers cope with American big city life, childcare services for working mothers, and cultural activities for neighborhood residents. There are times when newly arrived immigrants do not lose the unique aspects of their cultures like in the melting pot model. Instead, they retain them. The salad bowl theory, or pluralism, proposes a society of many individual, pure cultures in addition to the mixed culture that is modern American culture, and the term has become more politically correct than the melting pot, since the latter suggests that ethnic groups may be unable to preserve their cultures due to assimilation.